So we're going to talk about a science fiction author whose work has become so accurate, it feels less like fiction and more like a news report. The idea here is pretty simple, and maybe a little chilling. Philip K. Dick's America isn't a story you read, it's the world you're living in right now.
I mean, you know this world. You've seen it. That Blade Runner vibe, the rainy streets soaked in neon, those giant shimmering ads on the sides of buildings, that doesn't feel like some distant sci-fi future anymore, does it? It's basically just a Thursday night in any major city. The line between his imagination and our reality, well, it's gotten really, really blurry.
And here's the man himself, Philip K. Dick, saying this all the way back in 1977. This quote, this gets to the absolute heart of his work. See, he wasn't just writing about spaceships and aliens, he was obsessed with the nature of reality itself. He was convinced it was all a construct, something programmed, and that it could break at any moment. That's the key to understanding everything we're about to get into.
So let's frame this whole thing as a kind of message from the past, okay? From PKD, as he's known, looking at our world today. We're going to break down 3 of his most powerful visions and see exactly how they've become our reality. And we'll start with a big one. Who's really in charge?
First up, corporations. His take on corporate power, which you probably know best from Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Yep, the book that became Blade Runner, was so far ahead of its time. Long before any of us were worried about big tech, he imagined a world completely run by it.
At the core of this was an idea he called corporate sovereignty. What he meant was a future where corporations weren't just big businesses anymore. Oh no, they were the new governments. They made the rules, they owned the tech, and they got to decide what it even meant to be human. Sound familiar at all?
I mean, just look at the comparison. It's kind of uncanny, right? Dick wrote about corporations being more powerful than countries. Today, a handful of tech companies have more economic and cultural influence than most nations on Earth. He imagined private companies leading the way to the stars. Well, today it's not nations, it's Musk and Bezos racing to space. And his idea of a new kind of control? We just gave it a name, surveillance capitalism, where our data is the most valuable resource on the planet.
Which all leads to one really crucial question. When corporations own the digital space you live in and know more about you than you know about yourself, who's really holding the power? And this isn't just about money. This goes deeper, to the very fabric of what's real. Which brings us to Dick's next prophecy.
In his brilliant novel Ubik, he took this whole idea a giant leap further. He wasn't just concerned with who was in control of society. He was terrified that the very idea of a single shared reality was completely falling apart.
Science fiction author Charles Platt just nails it here. For Philip K. Dick, there was no solid ground under our feet. Reality was subjective, it was fragile, and it could be easily manipulated. He basically saw a future where my reality and your reality could drift so far apart that we couldn't even talk to each other anymore.
He was really into these 2 concepts from ancient Greece. First, the koinos cosmos. That's the shared world. It's the old idea that we all live in one common objective reality. But he saw society collapsing into the second one, the idios cosmos, the private world, where every single one of us is living in our own little subjective bubble.
And here is the machine that builds those private worlds today. Social media. Now, he couldn't have known the technology, but he predicted the effect perfectly. It's a simple process, really. Step 1, your data is tracked. Every click, every like. Step 2, algorithms create a detailed profile of what you think. Step 3, your feed is custom built to prove that you're right about everything. And step 4, you end up totally isolated in a reality bubble made just for you. You are, quite literally, living in your own algorithmically generated idios cosmos.
And the results of that? Well, they're all around us. It's the explosion of fake news, the intense polarization. We talk about living in a post-truth era like it's some new phenomenon, but Dick was writing the playbook for it 50 years ago. When everyone has their own set of facts, there's no common ground left to stand on.
So, if corporations run the world and our shared reality is shattering, what does that do to you? To the individual? Dick dove headfirst into that question in his most personal novel, A Scanner Darkly. And that leads us to his 3rd great prophecy, the fragmenting of the self. This is really the final piece of the puzzle, identity fragmentation. If the outside world is unstable and you know you're constantly being watched, how can your own sense of self stay in one piece? For Dick, this was the ultimate nightmare, the point where you look in the mirror and you're not even sure who's looking back.
We used to think of having one authentic self. But today, come on, we all perform multiple versions of ourselves online, right?
You've got your professional self for LinkedIn, your curated perfect life for Instagram, your anonymous self on Reddit, your gaming avatar. We're constantly splitting ourselves into different characters for different digital audiences.
And all of these fragmented selves are being watched. Things that were just plot devices in his books are now features on your phone. Facial recognition unlocks your device. Preemptive policing uses algorithms to guess where crime will happen. And constant monitoring isn't some dystopian fantasy. It's the actual business model of the internet.
And that creates this deep, nagging anxiety. I mean, if you spend your entire day performing different versions of you for an audience of algorithms, how do you find your way back to the real one? Is there even a real one left to find?
Which brings us to the biggest question of all, the one that hangs over every single page he ever wrote. How on earth did he know? How did he see all of this coming?
Seriously, was he a time traveler, a psychic? He actually claimed to have strange visions sometimes. How did a pulp science fiction writer from the 60s manage to draw a perfect map of the social and psychological landscape of the 21st century?
The secret is, he was playing a completely different game than most of his peers. See, while writers like Asimov or Clarke were writing about the future of technology and space travel, the external world, Dick was writing about the future of the human mind, the internal world. His was the science fiction of inner collapse.
So he wasn't a prophet in a supernatural way. He was more like a seismograph, an incredibly sensitive instrument that was just picking up the very first tremors of a society starting to crack. He could feel the coming madness of the modern world long before anyone else.
Just think about the era he lived in, the intense paranoia of the Cold War, the rise of an empty consumer culture, the quiet growth of government surveillance. He felt the loneliness of the individual in this new, alienating world. He took all these sicknesses, these pathologies of his time, and just followed them to their logical, terrifying conclusions.
And that right there is the key takeaway. The internet, AI, social media, they didn't invent this strange, paranoid world we live in. They just provided the perfect set of tools to finally build, on a global scale, the exact psychological landscape that Philip K. Dick had been living in all along.
Which really only leaves us with one last, very unsettling question. If we are, in fact, characters living inside one of his novels, what page are we on?